Good morning, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. We're here amidst our winter retreat. So the Sangha is currently on retreat, but we are taking a little break from our meditation practice for a couple of days. Hence, Ayya Soma is appearing after a while to discuss a little bit the translation of the Therīgathā that I did last year with the help also of Bhante Sudaso, who kindly edited all the work and provided incredible feedback. Although he's not joining us today since he's completely off the internet for a couple of months. So we created this in the meanwhile, the Therīgathā, so a little newspaper with some good news instead of the heartbreaking news that we usually get. That has some of the translations on. So, as mentioned yesterday, if you want a copy, you can send an email at info@emptycloud.org, and then we'll try our best to send you a physical copy, probably at the end of the winter retreat. We'll see, or maybe amidst the winter retreat during the work period. We'll see. Who knows? It all depends on the lay supporters. I can't send it to you, so depends on your karma. So good morning to Gita, Ian, another Gita. We have both Gita Nyana and Gita Brown, and hello to Kumu, and welcome to everyone else who's tuning in this morning. So yesterday in our first meeting on the Therīgathā, we kind of shared a bit of gave an overview of first impressions on the poems of the enlightened women of the time of the Buddha. And today we're going to start with the first of the sections where we're going to explore some topics in the Therīgathā. So I thought that this morning we could actually take this poem of Suba, the daughter of a blacksmith, and analyze sensual pleasures, and analyze some other poems also in the Therīgathā that have to do with sensual pleasures. So I'll put in the comments the link to the translation of Suba, the daughter of a blacksmith, which is Therīgathā 13.5. Before we continue, we can pay homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, the reason why we're all gathered here today. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. So the poem begins with Suba talking about how she encountered the teachings, or when she encountered the teachings, essentially, and what happened. And so she says, I was young and pure when I heard the Dhamma. I understood the truth through heedfulness, and then all sensual pleasures stopped being so appealing. I saw the danger in self-identity and longed for renunciation. So we see from these first verses that Suba was already in a good situation. So she already had some purity of mind that kind of created the conditions for, upon hearing the Dhamma, to understand the message essentially behind the Dhamma. and then truly kind of pierce it through heedfulness. So we see actually a hint also of the gradual training that the Buddha essentially has taught us, and that we still have today for posterity, which obviously the first step that the Buddha encourages us to do, whether we're monastics or lay people, is to establish ourselves in virtue. So to establish ourselves in the precepts, and then cultivate hiriyottapa, so cultivate this, we usually translate it as sense of fear of wrongdoing, sense of shame of doing anything that might be hurting ourselves or others, of doing something that is reprehensible by the wise. So essentially, whenever we think that the Buddha might disagree with what we're doing, we should be ashamed of what we're about to do and restrain ourselves. So seeing danger in the minor faults, which obviously with the monastics, it's in holding our precepts, whether it's obviously the non-transgressible precepts, so the parajika precepts, that if we transgress, automatically we're not monastics anymore. But then there's also all different types of precepts, and also minor precepts. Ajahn Chah, famous bhikkhu from the Thai forest tradition in Thailand, he actually, when you see the stories, there's this beautiful book that if you haven't read, I highly recommend, Stillness Flowing. That is an anthology, essentially, well, actually a kind of reconstruction of the biographical information that we have of Ajahn Chah, and also all his teachings to the monastic sangha, both Thai sangha and Western sangha that later came. And yeah, I think it's in that book that actually there's this chronicle of Ajahn Chah encouraging all the monastics to take like even the most minor precept as if it were like a sort of parajika precept. So that same attention, that not wanting to transgress it. So seeing the danger in minor faults. And lay people have less precepts, so it's a little bit harder. Paradoxically, isn't it? So in Buddhism, the more precepts you have, the easier it is. And the less precepts you have, the harder it is. But yeah, and cultivating the same sort of attitude of mind, of really not going like, oh, well, it's just a drink, or maybe it's just a sip. There was a fun friend actually in Italy when I was there. We're all greed types in Italy. Lots of sensual pleasures. So person was really interested in following the path, the Buddhist path, and takes the 5 precepts. And then actually he took 5 precepts with Bhante Sudaso, and then asked Bhante Sudaso later on, like, is it okay if, like, I drink some wine here and there? But it's absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not even a drop of alcohol. And he's like, all right, okay, I understand. And then after a while, he's like, okay, maybe I should try with the Italian bhikkhuni. She might be more, a little bit more permissive than the American monk, the American bhikkhu. So then he reaches out to me, and he's like, but like when I have like, the glass of wine, it's really with a meal. I'm not getting intoxicated. I think I'm still holding the precept. And I'm like, come on. And so, yeah, when we take that perspective, we kind of we tend to think, yeah, it's not a big deal. And it might not actually like be a good deal in the large scheme of things, because we're not actually like getting fully intoxicated and making a big mess that usually when people are perhaps drunk are very prone to doing. But we're creating a habit. So one of my favorite translations of sila is not as morality, but actually as habits. It made a huge difference in my mind. So instead of these, kind of commandments that we take them as, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, I shouldn't be killing, and I shouldn't be stealing, and I shouldn't be, doing sexual misconduct, cheating on my partner, or whatnot. I shouldn't be lying and I shouldn't be drinking. Boring. Instead, is actually realizing that we have all those habits already. We have the habit to kill. We have the habit to steal. We have the habit to lie. We have the habit to use our sexuality in poor ways. And we have the habit to intoxicate ourselves and become deluded, essentially, so that we can pretend that we're not being affected by our misconduct in the aforementioned ways. So the precepts, whether they're lay or monastics, they have been given to us by the Buddha out of compassion, incredible compassion, so that we can create new habits by practicing the precepts full-heartedly. We can start seeing the huge changes in our minds. And they're not instant, but if we really take them with a really strong commitment, after a short while, we'll see, that we're slowly, for example, if we are, like I was at the beginning of my practice, I had a very strong habit of killing sentient beings. Not humans. I was pretty good with the human part, at least when I found Buddhism anyway, in this lifetime, but definitely not. I think anything that was basically, I think I was kind of like Stan, actually, Stan the monastic cat here he's very good with big sentient beings, but as soon as like sentient being is smaller than him, so I was a cat in my past life, I don't know, like mice, I was like, yeah, he should probably like be dead, and instead of ruining my life, what I perceived as an obstruction to my peace of mind, and definitely all tiny sentient beings. So I think my standard of killing was from this being, this size, all to the lowest size. And so I didn't, in Judeo-Christian culture, usually there's not an emphasis on not killing sentient beings that are non-human. There's nothing that is considered morally wrong with that. And so even though I had a secular upbringing, obviously it was influenced by the tenets in Catholicism growing up in Italy. So up until Buddhism, I saw nothing wrong with that. I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, all mosquitoes should be all exterminated. Any kind of, sentient being that I don't quite like, that is an insect, kill it. So taking the practice of not killing, and it's so beautiful how the Buddha, is very compassionate. He doesn't say, oh, just be compassionate to all sentient beings, right? He's like, no, just don't harm them. And so by abstaining from hurting, abstaining from harming, abstaining from killing, then you create the conditions for compassion to naturally blossom in the mind. And so right now it's unthinkable for me to kill any sentient being. Actually, I look at it with horror and shame that there used to be those thoughts and those habits in the mind. So thanks to this practice of precepts, that's why I got so into it, right? I was like, this is really great. Wow, this mind is so much more pleasant. Wow, there's no much depression anymore in the mind. I used to be like really depressed every now and then, like, maybe it was that habit of harming that was affecting, this mental state. And by removing that, you actually make, you sweep the room, you dust it, remove all the dirt, the dust, and you're like, okay, welcome flowers. Oh, welcome nice scents. Oh, this is much more pleasant. I want to dwell here. And you can also recollect it. You're like, wow, I'm actually a pretty decent person. Not only didn't kill anyone yesterday or this morning, but I didn't even want to. And actually, I want for everybody to be happy. That's quite remarkable. Well done, Soma. So the mind is already primed, right? And so you see you're encouraged. And, personally then from 5, I went to 8. I was like, oh, pretty good. Interesting. And then 10, oh, awesome. And now 311. Highly recommended. Yelp review, 5 stars out of 5. So it's really, once again, a gift that the Buddha gives us, that creates these conditions for us to practice and see and develop an attitude towards heedfulness, as Soba says. So understanding the truth of Dhamma by really not being negligent, essentially. That's what apamada is, is the opposite of pamada, which pamada means negligent. So kind of being not really paying attention to the things that are there, but rather instead we start paying attention, because obviously if you want to not kill, you have to really be present. And that creates the conditions for, well, obviously the cultivation of mindfulness to be much easier. And also the cultivation of sense restraint. So you start paying attention to, which is, the second step of the gradual training that the Buddha suggests, to start paying attention to, all the 6 senses. So obviously we have different ways through which we experience the world. And it's usually through the eye, obviously, everything, all the different sides. So then I like that, like this pleasing thing, and this other thing I don't like, dislike, and this other thing, maybe it's neutral. It can be anything that goes from architecture to people. Some people, we find them very agreeable and physically pleasant, and some others we find physically unpleasant. Ourselves as well, or clothing, or makeup, all of those things, right? And usually we start paying attention to the mark of the beautiful, right? Everything that we like, or we start delighting in it. I used to work in fashion, so I have a very strong tendency towards it. I made it into a career. I'm like, oh, look at that beautiful fabric tailored in that particular way. Oh, and then by constantly paying attention to the mark of the beautiful, we create strong tendencies of mind, where then, this inclination of mind is strengthened and strengthened. And then whenever it's not present, our object of delight, there is a lot of suffering. And equally, obviously, the dukkha of there not being something currently present, or something that is displeasing to the eye. So being in a building, perhaps that is ugly, or perhaps our favorite sweater getting a hole, or our shoes being eaten by destroyed by dogs. That's who get hold of shoes, don't they? Usually they always pick the ones that you like, never the bad ones, huh? And so that the stress that comes there, and also the neutral things that perhaps we don't pay attention to until there is alteration. And so it's the same with the nose, with all the smells. They're pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. With the body, everything that we touch and that has a physical sensation. The ear, so all the sounds that we have. The tongue, that's a hard one, especially for monastics. Once we remove most of the common things, but we have to eat at least once a day. Usually, we can abstain for a period of time, and that can be, when especially the late people come that make really good food, can be a lot of attachment to those really refined, good tastes. And then, in the West, we tend to talk about the 5 senses, right? But in Buddhism, actually, the Buddha talks about the 6 senses. And which one is the 6th? Is the mind. So we tend to think that, it's only what we do with the body, perhaps the speech, that counts. And we kind of overlook the mind. This is a common wrong view. I definitely have that wrong view when I first started practice. I was like, yeah, as long as, who cares what I'm thinking, as long as I don't act upon it. Well, the Buddha tells us actually that that is one of the most harmful things that we can do, because there is no action that doesn't have a thought that precedes it. So whatever we cultivate with the mind, whatever we linger on with the mind, the more we are creating conditions for them to follow through acts of body and speech. And so we want to be very, very, paying much attention to what we're doing with body, speech, and mind. And so all of this gradual training obviously is all interconnected. And so obviously as we mentioned, there's moderation of eating is a step that is connected obviously with the tongue and the different tastes. And then developing wakefulness, so developing, not overindulging with sleep. The Buddha says there's, you can sleep as much as you like, you'll never be satisfied, there's this, could always sleep more. See, our resident is like, yeah, tastes pretty good, huh? Food tastes good, sleeping tastes good. Yeah, so the Buddha encourages us to go to bed with a very specific intention of the time that we're going to wake up, and then actually getting up, not snoozing and snoozing and snoozing and going like, it's so like warm, especially in the winter, like, oh, it's like so cozy in here. But instead developing that attitude of wakefulness, of really delighting in a sharp, clear mind. And all of this then creates fertile ground, once again, for the practice of mindfulness. So mindful being developing sati in every single thing that we do, and every posture that we have, and how we, wear our robes if we're monastics, or our clothing, and how we're moving around, and what we're saying, what we're thinking, and so forth. So very much connected to the restraints of the senses, and also obviously on the development of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And then only at the end, we have, after doing all this work, essentially the Buddha tells us, yeah, and then you're ready essentially to remove the hindrances and have way to practice and develop samadhi and develop the jhanas. So we see in the West, we got it all wrong. So we do the reversed training. So everybody instead is like, keeps on being quite unvirtuous while trying to attain the jhanas at the very beginning. And it's like, yes, there's so much suffering. The Buddha says that, suffering is created by craving. So let me just crave spiritual attainments right there. So there can be a lot of like this hunger of attainments for the sake of attainments, essentially, for going, my jhana is bigger than yours, essentially, and missing the whole point of these teachings, which is actually the liberation from suffering. So very important to see that. And before we proceed with this beautiful sutta, a beautiful poem from Suba, I wanted to actually share, in terms of the precepts, like some other poems. Actually, I'll just maybe, since we're kind of, well, not running out of time, but like time is going back past quite quickly when you have fun, hey? And so just some examples of the Elder Nalnuttara and the Elder Bhaddakundalakesa, who were both female wanderers. So they were already like monastics or ascetics at the time of the Buddha, practicing in different traditions, not into Buddhism. And so they were already doing certain precepts. And they explain in their poem how, kind of their practice went wrong until they actually met the Buddha, and they were like, okay, I'm going to sharpen all of this. So I'll put in the comments the Therīgathā 5.5, that is Nanduttara, she says, I used to worship fire, the moon, the sun, and the devas. I would go to the river ford and walk into the water. I took on many spiritual practices. I shaved off half of my head. I set my sleeping place on the ground and ate no food at night. So we see that she says essentially that she was doing a lot of the different spiritual practices that were popular in ancient India at the time, that were means of purification, means to attain purification of the mind. And they're actually still practiced, my understanding is, in different sects of Hinduism as well today. And so she says, I took many spiritual practices, shaving off half of my head, so not the entire head as we do in Buddhism, but she was halfway there. And clearly not sleeping on high and luxurious beds. So she had that precept covered. Not eating any food at night. So that's also essentially, a precept that we also follow in Buddhism. So, she was doing quite all right, right? But then she says, at the same time, I enjoyed jewelry and makeup. I pampered this body with baths and massages, afflicted with lust. Eventually, I acquired faith and went forth into homelessness. After I accurately saw this body, I uprooted lust. All states of existence have been cut off, as well as desire and aspiration. All bonds unbound. I have attained peace of mind. So here, essentially, she's communicating how, when you have a half sort of practice of the precepts of the Buddha, some things you get right, some things you get wrong. And so you are, restraining the faculties. You kind of do one step forward and two steps backwards, right? One step forward, two steps backwards. And that was what creates that confusion of the mind of, in some ways we're restraining, in some way we're fueling. And then there's kind of this stasis. Stasis, is that English? I don't know. Like stasis, yeah. Thank you, Ajahn. And so that can stop you and prevents you from fully making progress in the path. And then it's really beautiful how, she describes encountering the teachings of the Buddha, acquiring faith, and from there then really being enabled to see what this body is all about. So we're so infatuated with this body, thinking that it's, it can be actually very pretty if only we put some effort into it. Perhaps if we go to the gym, or, we cover it up with this and that, or we have all sorts of different haircuts, etc. And, my mother used to be a really beautiful lady, when she was young. And now she is in her 80s. And when I was spending her some time in the fall, it was really heart wrenching to see how she would remember that. She would remember how she was delighting in all of these things. And now she's dealing with the realization of the unreliability of this body, of how it's a carcass. It's definitely not that pleasant thing that she used to enjoy in the past. And so this is what the Buddha tells us, that, we can get very intoxicated with youth, intoxicated with health, right? Intoxicated with life in general. So thinking that this thing is very reliable and it always will be. My particular culprit is health. So now I've always had such good health since I was little. I would hardly ever be sick. And lately, in the past 2 years, my body's becoming more and more unreliable. It's a wreck. And I'm facing all these attachments of I really thought it was reliable, right? And it's so crazy, because you only intellectually know that it's, of course, it's subject to sickness until it becomes actually sick and you see the unreliability. And so Nanduttara had this opportunity through the teachings of the Buddha of actually piercing through that, accurately seeing the body. And then, of course, you become dispassionate. You're like, okay, I see it. What's the point of all of this? And then that enables us to really fully uproot suffering, really fully practice the teachings of the Buddha. And last poem of Bhaddha, who says, in the past, I used to wander with only one robe, a shaven head, and all covered in mud. The covered in mud is not really like a Buddhist practice, but it was a Hindu practice. Well, also the one robe, we tend to have more robes, so she was even more ascetic, than a Buddhist ascetic. But the shaven head, she had that. And then she says, I would see the blameworthy as blameless, and the blameless as blameworthy. Having ventured out from my days abiding at Vulture's Peak Mountain, I saw the stainless Buddha and the honored monastic Sangha. I kneeled, paid respect, and made Anjali in his presence. Come, Bhatta, he told me, and that was my higher ordination. I traveled to Anga, Magadha, Vajji, Kasi, and Kosala. Free of debt, for 50 years, I ate the country's alms food. Surely he accumulated so much merit, that wise lay devotee, who gave a robe to Bhatta, who has been released from all fetters. Sadhu. So, yeah, once again, so she starts talking about her practice before entering the monastic order, before practicing essentially the teachings of the Buddha. So once again, like Nanduttara, doing some things that were useful and some things that were not particularly useful. And then not having the capacity to distinguish what is essentially conducive to purification from what is not conducive to purification, actually an obstruction. So what I was talking about also earlier, like myself, prior to Buddhism, saying no blame in what needed to be, in what was blameful, what was not conducive to purification, like killing sentient beings, killing insects, right? So we can do other things that can be, once again, supportive to our practice. But then if we don't have the whole Dhamma, if we don't have all the scheme of the teachings of the Buddha, then we can get a lot of things wrong, and suffering is still there. And then she sees the Buddha. She's this monastic Sangha, is extremely inspired, and has an ordination from the Buddha on the spot, which is also interesting, by the way, because we see that there's a lot of mythology on the creation of the Buddhist order. So the whole how the Buddhist order was created by Mahapajapati going to the Buddha, and the Buddha not being particularly keen on ordaining women, all this mythology, right, that we have in the Buddhist tradition. But apparently here in this poem, the story seems a little bit different, right? The Buddha's like, yeah, come, Bhaddha. Not like, hey, Bhaddha, you're supposed to take on X, Y, and Z rules whatsoever, and like there's nobody that needs to convince the Buddha to ordain the Bhaddha Kundalakesa. But he's like, yeah, wonderful, come join the Sangha. And then she travels all over India, and she's free of debt because the Buddha says that until we attain awakening, we're essentially debtors. We're in debt. We're like the people with the student loans, except that we have no way to to repay the loans unless we attain awakening, unless we attain stages of awakening. Then in that situation, then we actually are repaying our debt towards the lay people who are supporting the Sangha out of faith to the Buddha. And so she says, yes, now I'm I'm free from debt. And that wise devotee, on top of that, I got that devotee who, offered my robes, offered my requisites to have accumulated extreme merit. And that's also an encouragement that the Buddha always gives us monastics to consider when we are practicing. This is, whatever we're doing, when we're really putting effort into the practice, we're making extremely good karma, not only for ourselves, but also for the people that are supporting us, so that then our spiritual life is not in vain, that they're actually putting all these efforts, the householders, to support something that is really valuable and that can be shared, and it's for the well-being of many. So after this parenthesis, we can go back to Suba. And so she says once again that the sensual pleasures stop being so appealing. When you start seeing. So she's like, I want to become a renunciant. And she says, I left behind relatives, workers and servants, and prosperous village fields, pleasing and delightful. So she's not, overlooking it. She's like, there's a lot of gratification in samsara. Otherwise, beings, as the Buddha says, wouldn't become infatuated with it. So we have to be quite, real about it. We can't just pretend that everything is awful in samsara and go like, oh yeah, it's going to be so great not having all these things. At the very beginning, one will have some longing and nostalgia, of course. And she's also like, all these things I was having a pretty good lay life, I liked my relatives, my family was pretty all right. I had a lot of workers. I had also servants, pretty neat. And all of my wealth, my village fields, are pleasing and delightful. It was pretty great. So she says, I gave up much wealth for the sake of going forth. Now that I have left the household life out of faith in the well-spoken true Dhamma, it wouldn't be proper for one who aspires to nothingness to revert to gold and silver after casting them away. Silver or gold do not bring enlightenment nor peace. They are not proper for a contemplative. This isn't noble wealth. It's just greed and intoxication, delusion and increase of impurity. It is unreliable, troublesome, and short-lived. Human beings with defiled minds pursue it. Heedless and lustful, they get into numerous quarrels, pitting themselves against each other. One can see those entangled in sensual pleasures afflicted with much misfortune, ruin, imprisonment, hardship, loss, grief, and lamentation. Treacherous relatives, why do you try to trap me in sensual pleasures? You know I have gone forth after seeing the danger in sensual pleasures. So she clearly is saying this as a response to her family, who is, this is very common. It's actually quite amusing to me because my sometimes my parents do that with me as well, trying to lure me with sensual pleasures. Greatest hit of parents for 2,500 years. Whether they were bhikkhunis or bhikkhus, obviously the famous Ratapala Sutta that the family was conjuring and getting all the former wives of Ratapala to show up, and then all the incredible food, and then all the incredible comforts, because he was coming from a wealthy family, and he's like, no, I'm not interested. Thanks, but no thanks. And they're like, what is wrong with you? Why don't you just be a householder, enjoy these things? They're hard to come by, and just make merit. And and maybe you can ordain when you're old, get the best of both worlds. And it's the same with Sumedha, and she's supposed to marry, as we were saying yesterday, Prince Anikarata. They're all going come on, Like seriously, all these like great sensual pleasures are hard to come by, and you want to like give them all away. Just enjoy them first, and then go forth. So it's the same here with Suba, and they're like, come on, this is some really good stuff that you want to let go. Gold, silver. And she's like, yeah, no, it's not proper. I don't want that. I'm not interested. And similarly to Ratapa, similarly to Sumedha, similarly to all the, monastics who are fully seen, who have actually practiced the teachings of the body of the Buddha, and pierced through all this delusion. They see, and we see it. We can also reflect on it today. I came out of retreat, and we're at the verge of World War III. And we can reflect, it's actually no different than in the Ratapala Sutta, when the king goes to Ratapala and says, how, you're young and all like healthy, and usually he had all his stereotypes of like who was going forth, and he didn't fit any of the sort of ideas. He's like, you're not old and decrepit, and you're also not poor, so you don't really need to be a monastic as a livelihood. And like you kind of have all the conditions that would make householder life quite incredible. Why are you giving all of this up? And Ratapala essentially tells him, the reason why I went forth was because the Buddha taught me essentially the three characteristics, empowered me to see through reality, through the delusion, to actually see how things are. And he asks the king, he's like, okay, so great king, you are so powerful and wealthy, and you have this like great country and with all these all sensual pleasures. And do you think that if tomorrow, there's a country next door that, is pretty prosperous and has all of these, good things, and there's an opportunity to conquer it, would you go and conquer it? And the king goes, yeah, of course. And then Ratapala goes, and if there's another country that is available afterwards, do you think you would be content with this other country that you already have? Or would you go and conquer it? And he's like, yeah, of course I will go and conquer it. And he's like, if there was another country, would you just be content with what you have, or would you go and conquer it? And he's like, yeah, of course I would conquer it. And so essentially Ratapala says, see, there's no end. You'll never be content. And it's so interesting because when I was a little child, I really wanted to win the lottery. And at a certain point, I started noticing how my mind would go, because I would go like, oh, I only have like this little pocket, the pocket money that my parents were giving me when I was depending from them. And I was like, oh, if only I could have X, Y, and Z, like a lot more, then I could buy this and that. So I was thinking, oh, there's this lottery ticket. I could have like 10,000, whatever dollar is the same. $10,000, I could do all these things, and And then I was thinking, actually, that's not that much, $10,000. Maybe I would need like $100,000. I could also give it to charity. And then I'm like, oh, but actually that wouldn't last that long, the $100,000. I think I need $500,000. I'm like, actually, even if $500,000, maybe I need $1 million, because I would also need to buy a house. From there, I started realizing that actually the more I was creating like the wealth, this material wealth in my mind, the more it was not sufficient, which was a kind of interesting reflection that was very useful also in Buddhism. Anyway, so Suba is essentially sharing this, that we accumulate this. So we get so obsessed with the gratification in sensual pleasures that then we don't realize the danger. And actually, we create strong conditions for pretty much all the disaster, that is happening, all the wars, all the conflicts that happen in large scale, but also in small scale. Usually family members don't get into quarrels unless there is something that they want to split, like inheritance, right? They're like, no, I want that part of the house. No, it's mine. No, my mom said that. No, I want that. Or if it can be of, if it's not an inheritance yet, it's all small things. That is mine, my toy, my thing. So we can see that whenever we are, acquiring things, whenever there's like stuff, the more we get attached to it, the more then we don't see the value in virtue, the more we pursue objects and actually commit some really bad things. We essentially break all the precepts if we ever took the precepts to begin with. And so if we haven't taken the precepts to begin with, it's all like quite sila is counterintuitive. The whole teachings of the Buddha go against the stream of our natural inclinations of mind. So we tend to naturally, shouldn't be ashamed of that. We should just be realistic about it. We tend to think, may people not cheat on me, but who cares if I cheat on others, like as long as they don't know, so that they then don't give me a hard time. Or who cares, if other people maybe not be intoxicated and may do a lot of harmful things, but I'm having a good time while being intoxicated. Or may people not kill me, but may I get rid of all these different insects that are bothering me. Or may I take that, I really like that object or that thing or that experience, may I have it? And may people not steal it from me or take it from me. So we naturally are leaning towards acquisition. And by realizing that, we have the consideration. Of course, there's the gratification of acquiring things, there's the danger, and there's the escape. Which, I mean, even if we are like Putin, the head of a really big country with all sorts of sensual pleasures, still not enough. Still not enough. Even if we win the lottery, still not enough. Even if we check all the boxes, still not enough. So the Buddha gives us another way out, which is the real deal. It's not the fake promise of I'll be happy if I get this, but it's the happiness of unconditionality, the real deal, without any loss, grief, lamentation, distress, but actually the elimination of that, and not only for ourselves but also for others. So the Buddha says, practicing these teachings, even if we do it for ourselves is okay. Even if we do it for the sake of others is okay. And ideally we understand and we practice for the sake of ourselves and others, because that's truly for whom it's beneficial. So so Subha continues, you're like, neither gold nor money will eliminate the influences of mind. Sensual pleasures are murderous enemies, foes, darts, fetters. So so she talks about the asavas, right? That we're trying to eliminate, what is usually translated as taints. And I translated it here as influences because that's kind of like the Pali word of influxes. And I kind of, there's all these influences. Sensual pleasures are actually one of the asavas that really permeate our experience. And it's kind of like this external thing, it seems, that blurs our day-to-day life. And so we tend to think of sensual pleasures as these gratifying things, but instead they're these frenemies, right? They look good, but then they stab us in the back. And so she says, treacherous relatives, why do you try to trap me into sensual pleasures? I have gone forth with a shaven head wrapped in the outer robe, collecting lumps of leftover food and robes made from discarded rags. These are the supports for the homeless life. This is what is proper to me. The great sages have spewed out sensual pleasures. I love spewed out, like they vomited. Literally, this is the Pali word. They vomited sensual pleasures. Very strong language. Not like, oh, ignore them. No, they vomited. Like they're like, all right, this is gross, and I just rejected, like physically. And very important, both divine and human. Because actually we think even the most refined state of existence in samsara is kind of disgusting. It's basically if we see a little child playing with the mud and being so enthralled with it, right? As adults, we can be like, I mean, there's much more refined sensual pleasures than that. Well, that's how devas relates to us whenever we get so obsessed with anything it is in samsara. They have some really much more refined sensual pleasures. They've got the real 5-star hotel, right? And so she says, yeah, anyone who's fully enlightened has rejected it completely all the sensual pleasures, both divine and human, pierced through it. They are in a safe place. They are liberated. They have reached unshakable happiness. I should not get involved with sensual pleasures where safety is not found. Sensual pleasures are deadly enemies. They're like a great massive fire. They are suffering. Greed is hazardous. Hazardous. Excuse my English, and thank you for the English speakers. Frightful, pestering, troublesome. It is the opposite of peace and the way into much delusion. Sensual pleasures are like the head of a snake, dangerous and dire. Foolish, blind worldlings delight in them. Indeed, there are many foolish beings in the world trapped in the mud of sensual pleasures who do not know the end of birth and death. Because of sensual pleasures, humans are on the path that leads to a bad destination. Many decide to follow it, bringing illness to themselves by producing enmity, torment, and complete defilement. Sensual pleasures are entrapping, the world's bait that binds us to death. So she's saying it in so many different ways, basically kind of like the Buddha, over and over again. So many, just to get the message through. Maddening, enticing, sensual pleasures crush the mind. Yeah, like also the encouragement of seeing how unpleasant it is to live with this craving of constantly wanting something. Like, what are we going to have today for lunch? Is it going to be pleasant or not? When is this meditation period going to be over? Like I want something instant gratification. Or when is the winter going to end and we're going to have like nice spring and the nice weather? Or when is this heat going to end? This is unbearable. I want something more cool, right? So they're just crushing the mind all the time. And she says they're traps set by Mara for the defilement of sentient beings. Sensual pleasures have endless drawbacks, cause much suffering, and are highly poisonous. They bring little enjoyment. They produce conflict, causing one's bright, wholesome traits to wither away. And then she makes a statement, unless it was not clear. And she tells her family, I will not go back to sensual pleasures, which have caused me so much misery. Now I always enjoy nirvana. Which is just cool, And as we say, the Buddha was the originator of cool, of the real cool, the real cool state, the cool state of nibbana. And in fact, she says, when I was battling with sensual pleasures, I longed for a state of coolness. Now I dwell heedful in the destruction of all fetters. Free from sorrow, stainless, safe, I follow the upright, noble Eightfold Path, the one because of which the great sage crossed over. And then the Buddha sees her and says, you see this person established in Dhamma Subha, the daughter of a blacksmith. Having become free from passion, she meditates at the root of a tree. Today is the 8th day since her going forth. faith shining in the true Dhamma, trained by Upalavanna, possessing 3 superhuman knowledges, leaving behind death, a free person with no debt, a bhikkhuni with developed faculties, with all bonds unbound. She is one who has done what has to be done and is free from influences. And then Sakka, using psychic powers, approached her with an assembly of devas, and the Lord of Beings paid homage to Subha, the daughter of a blacksmith. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May we all have this happy ending of Subha, the daughter of a blacksmith, right? So, yeah, this is the sharing of today. And I think that Subha used some really powerful words to kind of give us a sense, even though it really seems real. And we're so entangled with the gratification. And we have so much FOMO, the fear of missing out. But she encourages us to Jomo, to cultivate Jomo, the joy of missing out, and see how does that work? How does that feel? And if we actually take this out of faith first, because it can seem so counter to our really daily experience, to what seems quote unquote true to us, our truth. And when we start practicing, if we take that as working hypothesis and go like, okay, how about I let this go? How about, I try to cultivate this joy of missing out, then we actually really see the truth of it, and we see the coolness of the mind instead of the fire. So good to see you all, friends. And Michael, thank you. Yes, the retreat has been fruitful so far, and I look forward to see it in a few days. And Itam asks, where are you from? I'm from Italy, hence my Italianglish. Yeah, Luciano, in fact, knows. Yeah, I'm Italian, been living in the States for a little bit over 10 years. Actually 12, 14 years, I don't know, a long time now. And Gita says, I have seen people in this lifetime that are keeping precepts from childhood to old age. It's absolutely amazing and wonderful. Yes, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Quite beautiful. You have really good karma to be born Buddhist. So you know many people who have been, who are so virtuous. I'm meeting such people now that I'm at an older age. Oh, and Sud is saying, bless you, whoever was sneezing. So sweet. Kumir, very kind. Hello, Jayanta. And Kuma says, is attaining the 3 knowledges essential to be an arhat? Traditionally, no. Also, a lot of the Theris actually attain, the 3 knowledges, who become 3 superhuman knowledges, so exactly like the Buddha. So there is also the way of attaining arhatship, where you don't see your previous lives, for example, but you understand it through wisdom. Essentially, the realization. My understanding is that the realization, so how karma operates at large, is what is understood by every single arhat, and how beings fare in accordance to their actions, that is understood by everyone. And it's more the way through which this is understood that can shift in accordance to different stages of awakening. But a lot of the Theris were 3 knowledge bearers, I think it's said in English. And Sud says, so then, Ayya, with reference to what Venerable Subha said about Eightfold Path, if one practices it fidelity, then it will eventually lead to letting go of sensual desires and trappings. Yeah, well, so the Noble Eightfold Path is the way out of suffering. So it's the Four Noble Truths. Essentially, all the teachings of the Buddha says that all of his teachings, just like every single footprint of every single animal fits within the footprint of an elephant, all of his teachings fit within the Four Noble Truths. So the first truth, that there is suffering, that there is dukkha. Then the second noble truth, the cause of dukkha. Then the third noble truth, good news, there is an end of dukkha, there is an end of suffering. And then most importantly, how to get out of suffering. So the fourth noble truth, the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Buddha actually says over and over again that, if we want to attain awakening, but we don't practice the Noble Eightfold Path, we won't attain awakening. So there's no wishful thinking in Buddhism. It's not like, okay, I'm faithful and but I don't practice, and then automatically there's no freedom through faith alone. I think there in some Christian Protestant sects, for example, there's this idea that just by having faith in God, you can be a really terrible human, kill, etc. But just by believing in God as your Lord and Savior, then you automatically go to paradise and good destination. Well, the Buddha is very clear that that is not the case. Not only don't you attain Nibbana, you do not go to a higher realm, actually quite the opposite. You will go to hell realms for countless eons by doing bad deeds, even if you believe, in the teachings of the Buddha. And conversely, if you have no faith, but you actually practice the Noble Eightfold Path, you will attain awakening. So essentially, it's kind of like a cake, whether you want to make a cake or you don't want to make a cake. If you want to make a cake, but you don't know how to make the cake, and you're like, yes, I really believe that cakes are possible, but you don't follow the recipe, you won't attain the cake as a result, right? But if instead you don't know what you're doing and you just follow the recipe, you're like, I don't know what exactly is going to come, or I don't even know if the result is going to be a cake, or who knows. But you're like, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, you're going to end up with a cake. So yeah, if you truly practice, obviously, in order to practice the Noble Eightfold Path, it's very helpful. It makes it very easy to have, or easier to have faith. Otherwise, doubt, of course, it's a hindrance. It's one of the main hindrances that one can have at the very beginning. Because if you doubt that the recipe is going to actually turn into something useful, and it's a lot of work to do the recipe, you might as well do something else with your time. So it's very important. It's actually one of the powers, the power of faith, that the Buddha calls it, the power of saddha. It really fires up the mind in a good way to cultivate right effort, which is a factor of the path, and also right view. And of course, one needs to have full faith, full saddha in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha in order to attain stream entry. So to enter the stream and not rivers. So yeah, by just practicing the teachings, we automatically enter the stream. Jayanta, yes, I wasn't here on Sunday, but I'm happy that you managed to stop by. Hope to look forward to seeing you after our retreat is over in April. And Bhavani says, Namaste, do women will have more clingings or attachments while performing duties related to family responsibilities? It depends on the woman and it depends on the man. So there's not really, there's some, you take actually, a lot of these things are also culturally conditioned. A lot of Anglo-Saxon American families, for example, are very strings attached. Like the age of 18, you're kicked out of the home. They're usually raised to be independent. So it's very different. So the mothers, a lot of my American friends, they hardly ever speak to their parents, whether it's mother or father, as opposed to Italian parents, on the other hand, especially mothers, there's very much, my mom will have a lot of clinging and attachment while performing duties related to family responsibilities. But had she been born, maybe in the United States in in a particular time and place, in particular culture, she would have a different way of relating to it, So everything is dependently arisen. So sometimes it's dependently arisen from gender conditioning. Sometimes it's dependently arisen from culture. Sometimes it's nationality, whatever. So I would say that my dad has a lot more clingings and attachments, so man, related to family responsibilities than the average woman of Anglo-Saxon descent in the United States. So that's why I feel a little bit uncomfortable to say that, either women or men would have a particular attitude. And her friend here says, Anatta, is Dharma that tells you to not believe your impermanent life? I don't know what exactly you mean by that. But there's the 3 characteristics, and actually sometimes 4, if we also include the Subha. So we tend to see, the Buddha says that we have all these distortions of mind we were talking about yesterday, vipallasa, so that we tend to see the impermanent as permanent, the non-self as self, the suffering as pleasant, and the ugly as beautiful. So like as we were saying, there's you can tend to be very, very obsessed with this body, with the skin too. My skin now is really soft and nice. I put cream on, but like, for example, if we remove the skin and we created a bag out of our skin, our resident made up a distraught expression. It's not really that pretty anymore, is it? Or if we open it up and we see the interiors, all the different, it's actually funny, one of my relatives was supposed to have surgery, and the doctor started describing the surgery and how they were going to open his stomach and do remove this, or this, the different things between the organs, and describing it in detail, and he fainted. Because all of a sudden we're like, oh dear, this is really awful. Because we just create this distortion of how beautiful this body is, but it's actually quite disgusting. When we do the 4 elements meditation, it's quite powerful to see it. I remember the first time I started doing it and observing the water element, for example, I started noticing all the sweaty parts of the body and how we're kind of all gross and sticky all the time. And this mucus coming from all places, and in the ears, this deposit, and then we're constantly shedding parts and bits and pieces when we're cleaning our room and in the bed, all that flaky skin. It's disgusting. It's gross. So there is lots of work that we need to do prior to attain awakening. All right. There's comments, but not any other questions. Anyone has reflections, ideas, thoughts?
Could you speak a bit, Ayya, about methods, ways in which we can adjust our perceptions so that sense delights are maybe not so enticing for us?
Thank you, Venerable. Yeah, well, the Buddha is quite clear, for example, with how to deal with things that we find pleasant, is to actually look at the drawbacks. So perceive them as unpleasant. So actually he literally says pleasant feelings to observe, to perceive them as unpleasant, like actually do that. And so, for example, we can do it with food. It's very easy. Not at first, but when we find something, say ice cream, it's very easy to do the metaphor. At the very beginning, out of delusion, we just start obsessing about the pleasant experience of ice cream. So what I call the creaminess of the ice cream. Like, this is so good and sweet and tastes and it feels like nice. But we're actually not fully having the full experience. What about the ice part of the ice cream, for example? And so if we point our attention towards the ice part, we start seeing that actually in the teeth, there's that numbness that is not really that great. And there's also when it gets into the stomach, it's a really cold sensation that can be quite uncomfortable. And then also afterwards, the fatigue, the mental drowsiness of digesting something so sugarly, filled with sugars. There's lots of drawbacks, before, during, and after. So if we intentionally pay attention to the drawbacks, then we'll actually have a balanced experience. So this is not to be a Debbie Downer, and go like, oh dear, like we want to ruin our experience of everything, but rather actually dispel delusion. And then when we do that, we can get closer to the experience essentially that we want to aim at. So it's not that the Buddha was having an unpleasant experience, for example, in eating. He could actually have fully taste everything, fully be there present, but not delighting and not obsessing with things. Because if we obsess with, which we normally do, we obsess with what we find delightful, then we create this conditional happiness that creates a lot of suffering in the mind. That then when those conditions are not in place, when we have something, perhaps dreadful, I used to cry, actually. I'm not kidding. I was so attached to food that if I was in not a great mood, I remember I had moved to the United States and I was a little bit depressed and homesick, maybe. And I used to take refuge in food. I mean, not like intentionally, but essentially that was my relationship. I was eating food for fun, pleasure, and as a distraction, etc. And whenever there was something that was not going well in my life, I would rely on food because it was this quick fix, very readily available where I was coming from in Italy. We've refined a lot of these sensual pleasures. So I was like, I take this, I'll feel better. I mean, for a short while, then I was feeling awful again, and then I will take something else, and like you keep on deluding yourself with that. So I remember I was here in the States, and then I'm like, okay, I ordered this sandwich having an expectation that was going to taste in a particular way, and it was awful. And I started crying in the middle of the restaurant. And I shouldn't be sharing these things. It's really embarrassing, but it wasn't me. I mean, it was me, but not me, because I'm a different person now. So that previous version of me, and like my friend was like, that's the over the top reaction to just like a not that great sandwich. But it gives us a sense of how deluded the mind can be and how much we put our happiness on really unreliable things and on silly things, and then thinking that will make us happy. I still remember how strong that emotion was. So it's part of training and seeing it, and then renouncing and letting go, and I think it's very useful as a monastic because we don't have control over the food. And so sometimes we get some really great things and sometimes we get some less great things. And yeah, instead the beauty, like what I personally found very useful is to, instead of focusing on the object itself, is on focusing on the beauty and the kindness of the donor. And that is actually a more reliable happiness. You're like, oh, how wonderful. Like, even if this is perhaps something that I don't like or not my favorite thing, how wonderful that someone has even worried to actually create the conditions for me to be fed, for me to be able to practice the holy life. And if it tastes good, then also like how wonderful that someone has given this gift. So that is like something more beautiful, to reflect, and it actually can last for a long time, because then you can recollect all these people regardless of the object. But when we focus on the object, then instead we're like just cultivating suffering. And it becomes like, oh, yeah, I want more of that. Yeah, I want to associate with Tinnery because she's great. She brings me all these good things, but not those people over there because I don't like their things, And it becomes that really ugly thing. So if we really reflect on, I think, our conditions of mind, then it becomes easier. Of course. And if you have also like some thoughts maybe to share and pointers that have worked for you.
Well, I was one thought that comes to mind is considering what happens to the food. That turning of the beautiful to something not so attractive.
Yes.
So actually putting the mind there even as one is eating. I had that thought.
Yes.
Yeah. Talking about the Vipallasa and like what seems to be so beautiful. Is it really so beautiful? Will it be that beautiful in half an hour or a couple of hours? Where will it be then? What will it be then?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, that's a very good reflection. And also even without even what happens in the stomach, even what happens in the mouth. Like once we start chewing it, if we spit it in the bowl, would we put it back in the mouth? Doesn't look like that appealing all of a sudden, right? So it's very interesting that we don't even have to wait for it to be digested. We immediately are. I love our lay resident has some very striking expressions as she's thinking about it. But yeah, so far I've only met Stan, the cat, who actually eats his own vomit. He doesn't seem to be too phased by the but his defilement with food is very strong. He's very attached to it. But I think as humans, we already have that. I still haven't met a human that will do that, like to eat their own vomit or even their own chewed things. So it gives us, it's a very good reflection to see the unattractiveness of food, or the relative attractiveness of food. And also even like our favorite food, how many times can we have it? I remember at a certain point, we had never, nobody had ever offered pizza. So like there was kind of this little bit craving, and if we could only have pizza. And at a certain point, someone offers pizza. And then the rumor like kind of spread like, oh, I think they really enjoyed the pizza. And every day, like there was a pizza offered. It was a nightmare. I was like, oh, please, can we stop having this pizza? I can't take it anymore. So you have these, like even the things that seem so pleasant. That's why monastic life is such a blessing, because you'll really go through all these things because you don't have any power towards what comes. And you're like, well, actually, these things are not reliable. It doesn't matter. The most delicious thing will become disgusting after a while. All right. So I think that's all for this morning. We also went out of time, like ahead after the time. So we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. So thank you for tuning in today. This evening, I believe Bhante Sanata Vihari will be tuning in from Los Angeles, so with a live stream. And that will be at 7:30 p.m. New York City time. And then tomorrow morning, I will be back here with the third episode of the Therīgathā. So there we will be sharing some other poems and looking at a different topic. And then in the evening, we'll have monk chat, and it will be featuring Ayya Brahmavara, our lovely bhikkhuni who is practicing with us during the winter retreat. And then we'll shut down again for the last part of our winter retreat, but you will be having, I think there are some bhikkhunis sharing live stream teachings during the week. Definitely Venerable Palanyani and Venerable Vimalanyani, and then there are some blasts from the past from our past retreats. So I think there's Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's live teachings from the past, etc. So lots of good things on the channel. And then we will resume. The monastery will be opening again in April. So if you live close by, you're welcome to come and visit in April, and also like apply for a residency if you'd like to spend some time practicing with the monastic sangha, and definitely tune in online for all the live streams. All right, see you soon.